The Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with conversation as the charity fundraiser hit its stride. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom where the city's well-dressed elite mingled, champagne glasses in hand. In the corner stood a gleaming black grand piano, its lid propped open like a giant wing. Victor Harrington adjusted his bow tie as he approached the instrument. At 38, he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being the most talented person in the room. His fingers, long and nimble from 25 years of playing, twitched slightly at his sides, a pianist's unconscious habit when anticipating the keys. "Are you going to play for us tonight, Victor?" asked Richard Bennett, one of the event organizers and a longtime patron of the arts. Victor's mouth curved into what might generously be called a smile. "Well, I can hardly let such a beautiful instrument sit untouched, can I? That would be a crime against music itself." Richard chuckled politely and gestured toward the piano. "The floor is yours, maestro." Victor didn't need to be asked twice. He smoothed the tails of his designer tuxedo jacket and sat at the bench, taking a moment to adjust its height with practiced precision. The slight rustle of his movement caught the attention of nearby guests. Without announcement, he launched into Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. His fingers flew across the keys, the rapid notes unfurling like silk ribbons. The challenging runs that would tie lesser pianists in knots seemed effortless under his touch. He knew he was good, more than good. He'd studied at the Westfield Conservatory, had even performed with several respected orchestras before deciding that teaching master classes offered better recognition of his talents. As he played, the crowd slowly gathered around the piano. Victor was aware of every admiring glance, every whispered comment about his skill. He added extra flourishes to the already complex piece, occasionally closing his eyes as if overcome by emotion, though in truth, he was simply calculating the impression he was making. When the final notes faded, the audience broke into polite applause. Victor stood and offered a small bow, reveling in the attention. "Magnificent as always," said an older woman in a beaded gown. "You really should perform more often." "You're too kind, Mrs. Whitfield," Victor replied, though he certainly didn't think she was exaggerating. If anything, the praise felt inadequate for his skill level. The crowd slowly dispersed as waiters circulated with fresh drinks and appetizers. Victor made his way to the bar, accepting compliments with practiced modesty as he went. "Your usual, Mr. Harrington?" asked the bartender, already reaching for the top-shelf scotch. "Thank you. Thomas." Victor leaned against the bar, surveying the room with the satisfaction of someone who had once again proven their superiority. It was then that he noticed her, a woman in her early 30s. Dressed simply compared to the other guests, she wore a dark blue dress that, while elegant, lacked the designer labels and flashy jewelry that adorned most women in attendance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that emphasized her calm, thoughtful face. The woman stood near a group in conversation, but seemed slightly apart from them. Her eyes kept drifting toward the now vacant piano with an expression Victor recognized all too well: longing. Victor watched as she excused herself from the group and slowly made her way across the room. Her movement had a quiet grace to it, unhurried yet purposeful. When she reached the piano, she hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the keys without touching them. Something about her demeanor irritated Victor, the way she approached the instrument with such reverence as if she had some special connection to it. He'd seen it before, amateurs who believed that emotion could substitute for skill and years of rigorous training. After a moment's consideration, the woman sat down on the bench. She adjusted her posture, then placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody was simple, a folk song that any beginner could manage after a few lessons. Victor snorted into his drink. The woman played without mistakes, but there was nothing impressive about the performance. Basic chords, predictable progressions, the kind of thing that might charm those who knew. Nothing about music, but would never impress anyone with true musical knowledge. He set his empty glass on the bar with a decisive click and made his way back toward the piano. The woman was still playing, a small smile on her face as her fingers moved across the keys. A few guests had paused to listen, their expressions kind but not particularly impressed. "Excuse me," Victor said loudly enough to interrupt her playing. The woman's hands stilled immediately, and she looked up with a slightly startled expression. I believe the piano was provided for the entertainment of the guests. The woman's cheeks flushed slightly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No harm done, Victor cut in with a dismissive wave. It's just that these people have paid good money to support the arts. They deserve to hear music played at a certain standard. A flicker of something, hurt, perhaps, or embarrassment, passed across the woman's face, but she nodded and began to rise from the bench. I didn't catch your name, Victor said, not bothering to offer his own, though he was sure she must know it. Elena, she replied quietly. Elena Reyes. Well, Elena, Victor said, drawing out her name in a way that made it clear he found it unremarkable. Perhaps leave the entertainment to those who've mastered the instrument. Elena stepped away from the piano with a small nod. Of course. I was just... Actually, Victor interrupted, struck by a sudden impulse. Why don't we make this interesting? He was aware that several people nearby had stopped talking to listen to their exchange. The opportunity to further showcase his talents was too good to pass up. Interesting, Elena repeated, her brow furrowing slightly. A little impromptu duel, Victor explained, gesturing toward the piano with a flourish. You and I, we each play a piece and let the audience decide which they prefer. Elena shook her head. That's really not necessary. I'll even give you the advantage, Victor continued, as if she hadn't spoken. You can choose the piece. Any piece you like. He smiled, confident that regardless of her choice, his superior technique would easily outshine her amateur efforts. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, drawn by the prospect of drama. Victor could see the event organizer, Madeline Chen, watching with a concerned expression from across the room. I don't think music should be competitive, Elena said softly. It's not about being better than someone else. Victor laughed, the sound sharp in the quieting room. Of course you'd say that. But sometimes a little competition reveals true talent. He tilted his head, his voice taking on a challenging edge. Unless you're afraid? He could see the words land, not with the intimidation he'd intended, but with a kind of quiet consideration. Elena looked at him directly for the first time, her dark eyes studying his face as if trying to understand something about him. Madeline began moving toward them, clearly intent on diffusing the situation. But Elena raised a hand slightly, stopping her approach. Very well, Elena agreed, her voice still calm and unruffled. But instead of choosing pieces for each other, why don't we each play what moves us most? That seems a truer test. Victor nearly rolled his eyes at what he perceived as her attempt to avoid technical challenges. Emotion over skill, the typical refuge of the amateur. Fine. Ladies first, I insist, he said, stepping back from the piano with an exaggerated bow. Around them, the crowd had grown, guests nudging each other and whispering behind cocktail napkins. Elena approached the piano bench once more, adjusting it with a small, practiced movement that Victor might have noticed had he not been so busy imagining how he would follow her simple performance with something truly impressive. Perhaps Liszt's La Campanella, or Rachmaninoff's Prelude in Sears Minor, something with enough technical fireworks to make the difference in their abilities embarrassingly clear. As Elena settled at the piano, her demeanor changed subtly. The slight nervousness she had shown earlier seemed to fade away. She sat straighter, her shoulders relaxed, her hands poised above the keys with newfound confidence. She closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and in that small moment of stillness before she began to play, Victor felt the first twinge of doubt. Then her fingers touched the keys, and everything changed. The first notes that flowed from Elena's fingers weren't the simple melody Victor had expected. Instead, the rich, complex opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the ballroom. The piece was famously difficult, a mountain that many trained pianists spent years trying to climb. Victor's smug smile froze on his face. His eyes widened slightly as Elena's hands moved across the keyboard with unexpected confidence. The challenging arpeggios that many conservatory students struggled with for months came from her fingers with natural ease, as if she were simply having a conversation through the piano. The crowd, which had been murmuring with anticipation just moments before, fell silent. Several guests exchanged surprised glances. Someone whispered, "Is that Rachmaninoff?" in a tone of disbelief. Victor stood rigid beside the piano, watching Elena's hands. Her technique was flawless, that much he had to admit. But it was more than technical skill that held the room spellbound. She played with a depth of feeling that made the music seem alive, breathing and pulsing under her touch. Unlike Victor's performance, which had been calculated to impress, Elena appeared to have forgotten the audience entirely. Her eyes were closed, her body swaying slightly with the music as she navigated the piece's most challenging passages. The difficult left-hand stretches that had taken Victor months to master flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Victor felt a bead of sweat form at his temple despite the room's perfect temperature. He knew this piece intimately, had performed it himself, yet hearing it now was like discovering it for the first time. Elena's interpretation revealed emotional depths in the composition that he had never fully appreciated or expressed. As she moved into the piece's most technically demanding section, several guests with musical knowledge gasped audibly. Richard Bennett, who had been watching with growing amazement, glanced at Victor with a raised eyebrow. The unspoken question was clear. Who is this woman? Victor had no answer. The color had drained from his face as he recognized not just competence but true mastery, the kind that came from both extraordinary natural talent and years of dedicated study. This was no amateur who played simple tunes at family gatherings. This was an artist. When Elena finished the movement, the room remained in stunned silence for 3 heartbeats before erupting into spontaneous, enthusiastic applause. Several people stood, including Mrs. Whitfield, who had praised Victor's playing earlier. Elena opened her eyes, seemingly surprised by the reaction, as if she had indeed forgotten where she was. She accepted the applause with a modest nod and a small smile. Then she turned to Victor, and what struck him most was the complete lack of triumph or mockery in her expression. There was only a genuine love for the music she had just shared, and perhaps a touch of curiosity about what he would play next. "Your turn," she said simply. Rising from the bench, Victor had never felt so unprepared to play in his entire adult life. The carefully constructed image he had maintained, the superior musician, the natural master of the keyboard, had been shattered in minutes. The audience, which had always been so easily impressed by his playing, now watched him with different eyes. They had glimpsed true artistry and would not be so easily swayed by mere technical competence. He approached the piano with uncharacteristic hesitation. His usual theatrical preparations, adjusting the bench, stretching his fingers, the dramatic pause before beginning, all seemed hollow now, and he abandoned them. He sat rigidly, aware of every eye on him, particularly Elena's calm, interested gaze. After a moment's hesitation, he began playing Liszt's La Campanella, a piece famous for its technical difficulties. It had been his competition piece for years, guaranteed to impress with its rapid hand crossings, wide leaps, and lightning-fast repeated notes. His fingers moved with practiced precision, but even to his own ears, the notes emerged mechanical and lifeless. He pushed himself to add more flourish, more speed, attempting to compensate with difficulty what Elena had achieved with soul. Halfway through the piece, Victor made a mistake, a small one but noticeable. His left hand missed a jump, landing on a wrong note that clanged discordantly. He recovered quickly, but the error had broken his concentration. Another mistake followed soon after, a finger slipping on a rapid trill. Sweat now beaded visibly on his forehead. The audience still watched attentively, but he could sense the difference in their engagement. Where Elena had held them breathless, he was merely holding their polite attention. As he continued playing, fighting to regain his usual confidence, Victor became increasingly aware of the contrast between Elena's moving performance and his own hollow display of technical skill. His fingers hit all the right notes mostly, but the music remained just that, notes, not art. When he finished, the applause was polite, but nothing like the genuine response Elena had received. People clapped with the automatic courtesy reserved for performances that were technically proficient, but emotionally empty. Victor stood from the bench, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. How had this happened? How had he, Victor Harrington, pride of the Westfield Conservatory, been so thoroughly outplayed by a woman he'd never heard of? Elena stepped forward and extended her hand. "You play beautifully," she said, and the worst part was that he could tell she meant it. Liszt is tremendously difficult. Victor took her hand automatically, her simple kindness somehow making the situation both better and worse. "You're very skilled," he managed, the compliment feeling inadequate. "Where did you study?" Before Elena could answer, they were surrounded by guests eager to compliment her performance. Mrs. Whitfield pressed forward to clasp Elena's hand. "My dear, that was extraordinary. I haven't heard Rachmaninoff played with such feeling since I attended Vladimir Ashkenazy's concert in Vienna." "Thank you," Elena replied with genuine warmth. "It's one of my favorite pieces." "Are you performing anywhere in the city?" asked another guest. "I'd love to hear a full recital." Elena shook her head. "No, I don't perform professionally anymore." This revelation only added to Victor's confusion. Anymore? That implied she once had. Madeline Chen finally made her way through the crowd to Elena's side. "I see you've met our guest of honor," she said to Victor, whose confusion only deepened. "Guest of honor?" Madeline nodded. "Elena is receiving our foundation's annual grant this year. Her music program in East River has shown remarkable results." Victor stared at Elena with new eyes. "You're a teacher?" "Yes," Elena replied simply. "I work with children who wouldn't otherwise have access to music education." The pieces were starting to come together in Victor's mind, but still incompletely. A former professional pianist, now teaching underprivileged children, being honored at a charity event he had treated as merely another opportunity to showcase his talents. "Let me get you both a drink," Madeline suggested, sensing the awkward tension. "We have about 30 minutes before dinner is served." As they followed Madeline to the bar, Victor found himself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. His entire understanding of the evening and of himself had been upended. Thomas the bartender greeted them with practiced efficiency. "The usual, Mr. Harrington?" He looked to Elena. "And for you, ma'am?" "Just sparkling water, please," Elena replied. Victor declined his usual scotch in favor of the same. Alcohol, he felt, would not help his current state of mind. "So," he began once they had their drinks, "you were a professional pianist?" Elena nodded. "For about 10 years. With which orchestra?" Victor asked, still trying to place her in the musical world he thought he knew so well. "I was with the Philadelphia Orchestra for most of that time," she answered. Victor nearly choked on his water. The Philadelphia Orchestra was one of the Big Five American orchestras, internationally renowned. To have been their pianist for a decade was no small achievement. "But why?" he began, then stopped himself, realizing how his question would sound. Elena seemed to understand anyway. "Why am I not still performing? Why am I teaching in East River instead?" She smiled without resentment. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes." Victor nodded, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with his earlier behavior. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. "I was presumptuous." "There's no need to apologize," Elena replied. "We all make judgments based on incomplete information." "Most people don't challenge strangers to musical duels to prove their superiority," Victor pointed out, a hint of self-deprecating humor creeping into his voice for perhaps the first time in years. Elena laughed, a warm sound free of mockery. "No, that was a unique approach." Their conversation was interrupted as Madeline returned to guide them to their dinner tables. To Victor's surprise, he found himself seated next to Elena. "I'd like to hear more about your program," he said as they settled in, realizing with some amazement that he genuinely meant it. As the first course was served, Elena began to tell him about her music school in East River, and Victor Harrington, who had spent years believing he had nothing to learn from others, found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in a very long while. The East River neighborhood wasn't always struggling, Elena explained as she finished her main course. When the factory closed 10 years ago, everything changed. Families that had lived there for generations suddenly couldn't make ends meet. Victor listened with genuine interest. A new experience for him at these events where he usually spent dinner, calculating how soon he could politely leave after showcasing his talents. The elementary school had to cut all their arts programs. Elena continued. Music, art, drama, everything that wasn't considered essential. That's when I decided to start the program. "Alone?" Victor asked, impressed despite himself. Elena smiled. "At first. I had some savings from my performing years, and I found a small storefront with reasonable rent. Started with one piano, not nearly as nice as this one," she added, glancing toward the grand piano across the ballroom. "Word spread quickly. Now we have about 60 students and 3 other teachers who volunteer their time." "That's remarkable," Victor said, meaning it. The contrast between her work and his own career choices felt increasingly stark with each detail she shared. While he'd been building his reputation and ego at Exclusive Conservator, their conversation was interrupted as Madeline Chen approached their table. "Elena, they're ready for your speech whenever you are. Just a few minutes about the program and what the grant will help you accomplish." Elena nodded and excused herself. Victor watched as she made her way to the small podium set up at the front of the room, her posture confident but without the showmanship he would have adopted in her position. The room quieted as Madeline introduced Elena, detailing the selection process for the Foundation's annual grant and why Elena's music program had stood out among dozens of applicants. When Elena took the microphone, she spoke without notes, her voice clear and passionate. "Music saved me as a child," she began. "My family couldn't afford lessons, but I had a teacher who saw something in me and taught me for free. She changed the course of my life." Victor felt an uncomfortable twinge as he thought about his own privileged upbringing, with parents who had happily paid for the best teachers and the finest instruments. At East River Music Project, we believe every child deserves the chance to discover if music might be their path too, Elena continued. We've seen remarkable transformations. Children who were failing in school finding a reason to show up every day, teenagers who were heading down dangerous roads finding discipline and purpose through practice. She shared a few brief stories about specific students, a boy who had been nonverbal until he found expression through the cello, a girl whose anger issues disappeared when she sat at the piano. The grant from the Westside Arts Foundation will allow us to finally buy our building instead of renting. It means security for our program and the chance to expand to more students from the waiting list. The applause when she finished was warm and genuine. Victor found himself clapping harder than anyone, moved by her simple eloquence and clear dedication. As dinner transitioned to coffee and dessert, the event began to wind down. Several guests approached Elena to offer additional support, promises of donated instruments, offers to volunteer, invitations to bring her students to perform at other charity events. Victor hung back, watching as she handled each conversation with grace and genuine appreciation. He noticed she never spoke about herself or her accomplishments, always redirecting the focus to her students and their needs. When the crowd around her finally thinned, Victor approached again. "Your speech was very moving," he said. "Thank you," Elena replied. "I always get nervous talking about the program, but it means so much to me." "I could tell," Victor said. He hesitated before adding, "I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier. You said you don't perform professionally anymore. Why did you stop?" A flicker of something, not quite sadness but a certain wistfulness, crossed Elena's face. "My mother became ill about 8 years ago. Alzheimer's. I came home to care for her, and my touring schedule wasn't compatible with that responsibility." "I'm sorry," Victor said, and found he genuinely meant it. Elena nodded her acknowledgement. "After she passed, I could have gone back to performing, I suppose. But by then, the music project had become my focus. The children needed consistency, and I found I preferred teaching to performing. There's something special about nurturing new talent rather than showcasing my own." The humility of her statement made Victor's chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and shame. How different her approach was from his own. "Would you like to see the school sometime?" Elena asked unexpectedly. "We're having a small recital next Friday evening. Just the students showing what they've learned this semester. Nothing fancy, but they've worked very hard." The old Victor would have made an excuse, too busy, prior commitments, not his kind of event. But something had shifted in him over the course of the evening. "I'd like that very much," he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. They exchanged contact information, and as the evening drew to a close, Victor found himself lingering longer than he ever had at such events. Finally, as the ballroom emptied and hotel staff began clearing tables, he knew it was time to leave. "It was educational meeting you, Elena," he said as they walked toward the exit. Elena laughed softly. "That's a unique compliment." "I mean it, though," Victor insisted. "You've given me a lot to think about." "Good thoughts, I hope," Elena replied with a small smile. "Challenging ones," Victor admitted, "but necessary." They parted ways outside the hotel, Elena heading toward the subway while Victor waited for the valet to bring his car. As he drove home through the quiet city streets, his mind replayed the events of the evening, his arrogant challenge, Elena's remarkable performance, the stories of her students. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely dissatisfied with himself. Not because he had played poorly, though by his standards he had, but because he recognized how hollow his accomplishment suddenly seemed in comparison to Elena's work. The following Friday found Victor standing outside a weathered brick building in East River, checking the address Elena had sent him. A simple sign in the window read, East River Music Project, the letters slightly faded from years of sun exposure. Inside, the space was modest but welcoming. What had once been a small retail shop had been transformed with carpets, colorful artwork, and of course musical instruments. A collection of mismatched chairs had been arranged in rows facing a small cleared area, with a piano that had seen better days but appeared well-maintained. Parents and siblings were already filing in, greeting each other with the familiarity of a close community. Victor felt conspicuously out of place in his tailored shirt and expensive shoes, clearly not a local or a family member of any student. "You came," Elena's voice carried from across the room. She made her way through the crowd, dressed simply in dark pants and a blue blouse, a stark contrast to the elegant dress she'd worn at the fundraiser, but somehow more fitting for the woman he was beginning to know. "I said I would," Victor replied, feeling oddly pleased by her evident surprise. "I know, but," she shrugged. "Well, I'm glad you're here. Let me introduce you to some of the other teachers before we start." Victor followed her through the crowd, meeting a retired high school music teacher, a violinist from the city symphony who volunteered weekends, and a young man who had been one of Elena's first students and now taught beginners himself. "Everyone here believes in what we're doing," Elena explained. "They give their time because they've seen the difference music can make." Before Victor could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, and Elena excused herself to begin the recital. He found a seat in the back row, watching as she welcomed everyone with the same warm confidence she had shown at the podium during the fundraiser. "Music is a journey," she told the audience. "Some of our students began just a few months ago. Others have been with us for years. What they all share is courage. The courage to learn something new, to practice when it's difficult, to perform even when they're nervous. Tonight is about celebrating that courage, not perfection." The students ranged from young children to teenagers, each approaching their instrument with varying degrees of confidence. Some played simple pieces with careful concentration. Others performed more advanced music with developing skill. What struck Victor most was not their technical ability, which ranged from beginner to promising, but the evident pride in their accomplishments and the supportive atmosphere. After each performance, regardless of how many mistakes were made, the audience applauded enthusiastically. Elena moved between introducing students and accompanying some on the piano, her interactions with each child thoughtful and encouraging. Victor noticed how she whispered something to each student before they performed, and how invariably they stood a little straighter afterward, facing the audience with more confidence. About halfway through the program, a girl of about 12 approached the piano. She had a serious expression and fingers that trembled slightly as she adjusted the bench. "This is Lily," Elena announced. "She's been with us for 3 years and has worked incredibly hard on this piece," which she selected herself. The girl began to play, and Victor immediately recognized Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece he had assigned to his advanced adult students, considering it too emotional and technically demanding for children. Yet here was this girl from a neighborhood most of his students wouldn't dare drive through, playing with remarkable sensitivity. Her technique wasn't perfect, there were hesitations, a few missed notes, but there was something in her interpretation that caught at Victor's heart. She played as if she understood the emotion behind the notes, not just the notes themselves. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. The girl's serious expression bloomed into a wide smile as she took a small bow. Victor found himself standing with the rest of the audience, genuinely moved by her performance. As the recital continued, he began to see what Elena had created here. Not just a music school, but a community where children were valued for their effort as much as their achievement, where music was a means of expression rather than competition. By the time the final student performed, Victor Harrington, who had spent his entire adult life believing he had nothing to learn from anyone with less training or prestige than himself, realized how profoundly wrong he had been. After the recital, parents and students mingled in the small space, sharing cookies and juice from a folding table at the back. Victor stood awkwardly near the wall, feeling out of place yet oddly reluctant to leave. He watched Elena move through the crowd, connecting with everyone. A gentle hand on a shoulder here, a proud smile there, bending down to eye level with the youngest children. First time here? Victor turned to find an older man with work-worn hands and kind eyes studying him. Yes, Victor replied. I'm a friend of Elena's, the man nodded. I'm Robert. My granddaughter Lily played the Chopin piece. She was wonderful, Victor said sincerely. I teach piano myself, and I was very impressed with her interpretation. Robert's face brightened. She practices every day after school. Never have to remind her. Before she found this place, she was so quiet, barely spoke to anyone. Now she's got plans, wants to be a music teacher someday like Ms. Elena. Victor nodded, thinking of his own students, mostly adults with disposable income who treated lessons as a hobby, or parents pushing reluctant children to build their college applications. He couldn't remember the last time he'd taught someone who played with Lily's natural feeling for the music. This place, Robert continued, gesturing around the modest room. It's been a blessing for this neighborhood. Gives these kids somewhere to go, something to care about. Before Victor could respond, Elena appeared beside them. I see you've met Robert, she said warmly. Lily's performance was special tonight, wasn't it? I was just telling your friend here how much music has changed her, Robert said. Well, I should find the little star. She's got school tomorrow. He shook Victor's hand firmly before heading off to collect his granddaughter. What did you think? Elena asked once they were alone. Victor took a moment to gather his thoughts. It's not what I expected, he admitted. The way you connect with the students, how they respond to music, it's different from what I'm used to. Different how? More genuine, Victor said, the word feeling inadequate. In my world, it's always about being the best, winning competitions, impressing the right people. Here, it feels like it's actually about the music. Elena smiled. That's exactly what we're aiming for. Most of these kids won't become professional musicians, but that doesn't matter. Music gives them confidence, discipline, emotional outlet, community. That's success to me. As the crowd began to disperse, Elena invited Victor to stay and help clean up. He found himself rearranging chairs and gathering sheet music alongside the other volunteers. Simple tasks that somehow felt more meaningful than the prestigious master classes he'd taught. Do you have plans for dinner? Elena asked as they finished. A few of us usually grab something at the diner around the corner after recitals. Nothing fancy, but the food is good. The old Victor would have made an excuse, preferring the exclusive restaurants where he was recognized and treated with deference. But something had shifted in him. I'd like that, he said instead. The diner was busy but comfortable, with vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone Hon. Victor sat somewhat stiffly beside Elena, across from the retired music teacher, Tom, and the young volunteer instructor, David. So how do you know Elena? Tom asked after they'd ordered. Victor glanced at Elena, who was clearly trying not to smile. We met at the Westside Arts Foundation fundraiser, he said. I challenged her to a piano duel. David nearly choked on his water. You did what? I didn't know who she was, Victor explained, feeling his face grow warm. I made some incorrect assumptions. He thought I was an amateur who needed to be put in my place, Elena said. But her tone was light, without resentment. And then she played Rachmaninoff and completely showed me up, Victor added, finding he could now laugh at his own arrogance. The conversation flowed easily after that, full of stories about the music school's early days, memorable students, and the constant struggle for funding. Victor mostly listened, struck by how different this casual meal was from his usual dining experiences. No pretension, no networking, just genuine connection. What about you, Victor? Tom asked eventually. Elena mentioned you teach at Westfield Conservatory? Yes, master classes, mostly, Victor replied, suddenly feeling that his prestigious position sounded hollow in this context. Advanced adult students, a few talented teenagers on track for music careers? Must be rewarding working with students at that level, David said without a trace of irony. Victor considered this. It can be, he said slowly. But honestly, after seeing your recital tonight, I'm not sure I've been approaching teaching the right way. How so? Elena asked. Victor struggled to articulate the realization that had been forming throughout the evening. I think I've been teaching technique, not music. Performance, not expression. He looked at Elena. Watching you with your students, how you focus on their connection to the music, not just their execution, it made me realize what's been missing in my own teaching. A comfortable silence fell over the table, broken only when the waitress arrived with their food. As they ate, the conversation shifted to broader topics: favorite composers, concerts they'd attended, the state of music education in public schools. By the time they finished dinner, Victor felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. These people cared about music in the same way he did, beneath all the layers of ego and accomplishment he'd wrapped around his talent. As they left the diner, Elena walked with Victor toward the subway station. The spring night was mild, the neighborhood quieter now. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I know it's probably not the kind of event you usually attend." "I'm glad I came," Victor replied honestly. "It's given me a lot to think about." Elena studied him thoughtfully. "Like what?" Victor took a deep breath. "Like the fact that I've spent years building a career around being better than other people, when I could have been using music to help people instead." The admission felt both painful and freeing. "The way you've created something that makes a real difference in these kids' lives. It's meaningful in a way my master classes and competition wins never have been." They had reached the subway entrance. Elena turned to face him directly. "It's never too late to change direction, you know." Victor nodded slowly. "That's what I've been thinking about. I'm just not sure where to start." "We're always looking for volunteers," Elena suggested with a small smile. "Someone with your training and experience would be invaluable to our students. If you're serious about wanting to approach teaching differently, that is. The idea of volunteering in this struggling neighborhood, teaching beginners and intermediate students who might never reach conservatory level, would have seemed absurd to Victor a week ago. Now it felt like an opportunity. "I'd like that," he said, surprised by his own certainty. "Really?" Elena's expression was a mixture of pleased surprise and mild skepticism. "Really," Victor confirmed. "Maybe once a week to start. I could work with some of your more advanced students like Lily." Elena's face broke into a genuine smile. "That would be amazing. The kids would be so excited to work with a teacher from Westfield." They arranged for Victor to start the following Wednesday afternoon. As they said goodbye and Elena disappeared into the subway station, Victor decided to walk for a while before hailing a cab. The night air was refreshing, and he needed time to process the unexpected turn his life had taken. The next morning, Victor woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. After his usual coffee, he sat at the baby grand piano that dominated his living room, an instrument more expensive than all the pianos at Elena's school, combined, and began to play. Instead of his usual, technically demanding practice pieces, he played a simple Mozart sonata, focusing not on perfect execution, but on the emotion behind the notes. He played as if telling a story rather than showcasing his skills, and found the music speaking to him in ways it hadn't for a long time. Afterward, he made a decision. He picked up his phone and called the director of Westfield Conservatory. "Jack, it's Victor Harrington. I've been thinking about that outreach program you mentioned last year, the one I said I was too busy for." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to discuss implementing it now." There was surprised silence on the other end before Jack responded enthusiastically. The conservatory had been looking to improve its community image, and Victor's unexpected interest was welcome. By the end of the call, they had outlined a basic plan. Westfield would offer scholarships to talented students from underserved neighborhoods, with Victor heading the selection committee. Additionally, conservatory students would receive credit for teaching in community programs, like Elena's. As Victor ended the call, he felt a weight lifting that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The pursuit of perfection and prestige had been a lonely path. Perhaps this new direction would lead somewhere more meaningful. He sat back down at the piano and began to play again, this time a piece he'd composed years ago, but had abandoned for being too simple for his repertoire. Now its straightforward melody felt honest in a way his more complex performances never had. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Victor Harrington played not to impress anyone, not to prove his superiority, but simply for the joy of the music itself. 3 months later, the East River Music Project looked dramatically different. The grant money had been used to purchase the building as planned, but unexpected additional funding had allowed for renovations as well. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new carpet covered the floors, and most significantly, a restored baby grand piano, donated by Westfield Conservatory, now sat where the worn upright had been. Victor arrived for his weekly volunteer session, carrying sheet music and a small bag of cookies from the bakery near his apartment. He'd started bringing treats about a month into his teaching, after noticing how many students came straight from school without stopping for a snack. Mr. V. 12-year-old Lily waved enthusiastically as he entered. She had taken to calling him Mr. V when she found Mr. Harrington too formal, and somehow the nickname had stuck with all the students. "Ready for your lesson?" Victor asked, returning her wave with a smile that would have surprised anyone who knew him from his previous life of stern master classes. "I practiced the Debussy piece every day this week," Lily said proudly. "And I looked up the history like you suggested. Did you know he was friends with Sadi? We played one of his pieces in music class at school." Victor marveled at the transformation in this formerly quiet girl. In the 3 months he'd been working with her, she had blossomed, devouring music theory and history with an enthusiasm that matched her natural talent. "That's excellent research," Victor said, placing his materials on a nearby table. "Let's warm up and then you can show me what you've worked on." As he guided Lily through her lesson, he was aware of Elena moving through the room, working with other students. Their eyes met briefly across the space, and she gave him a quick smile before returning her attention to a young boy struggling with violin fingering. The easy communication between them had developed gradually over these months of working together. Victor's weekly sessions had quickly expanded to twice weekly, then 3 times. He found himself scheduling his other commitments around his time at East River, rather than the other way around. After Lily's lesson, Victor worked with 2 more students before taking a short break. He found Elena in the small kitchenette area making tea. "How's Michael doing with the Bach piece?" she asked, offering him a cup. "Better than last week," Victor replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "His timing has improved. He just needs to build finger strength, which will come with practice." Elena nodded. "He's been coming in early to use the piano before his regular lessons. His grandmother told me he set his alarm clock an hour earlier on school days so he can practice at home before his siblings wake up." Victor shook his head in amazement. "When I think about the students I've taught who had every advantage, private lessons since age 4, their own instruments, parents driving them to every opportunity, and still complained about having to practice." "Different perspectives," Elena said simply. "For our students, music is a privilege, not an obligation." They shared a comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching the busy room. In addition to the regular lessons, the space now hosted a weekly orchestra practice, music theory classes, and a new choir program, all made possible by the influx of volunteers and resources that had followed Victor's involvement. His connections at Westfield had brought not only donated instruments and sheet music, but also a steady stream of conservatory students eager for teaching experience. The partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations, bringing benefits to both institutions. "I almost forgot," Elena said suddenly. "The community center confirmed we can use their auditorium for the summer showcase. It seats 300, which should be plenty for all the families, plus the Westfield donors you're inviting." The showcase had been Victor's idea, a formal concert featuring the most dedicated students from East River performing, alongside advanced students from Westfield. Equal billing, equal importance. The event would serve as both a celebration of the students' achievements and a fundraiser to expand the program to other neighborhoods. "Perfect," Victor replied. "And the program?" "Almost finalized. Just waiting on a few students to confirm their pieces." Elena hesitated before continuing. "The committee was wondering if you would consider performing as well." As the finale, Victor blinked in surprise. "Me?" "You are still one of the city's premier pianists," Elena reminded him with a gentle smile. "Even if you've been hiding in East River lately." Victor hadn't performed publicly since the night of the fundraiser and the ill-fated piano duel. His focus had shifted so dramatically to teaching that he hadn't even considered returning to the stage. "I don't know," he said slowly. "This showcase should be about the students, not me." "It is about the students," Elena agreed. but having you perform would draw more attention to their accomplishments. The kind of attention that leads to more opportunities. Victor nodded thoughtfully. I'll consider it. But only if you'll perform too. Now it was Elena's turn to look surprised. Me? I haven't performed in public in years. Neither of us has performed recently, Victor pointed out. We could play together, a duet. The idea formed as he spoke it, but immediately felt right. The symmetry of it appealed to him. The two of them who had met as musical adversaries coming together as collaborators. Elena considered the suggestion. What piece did you have in mind? Rachmaninoff, Victor said without hesitation. The Suite No. 2 for two pianos. It's challenging but beautiful, and it would showcase both our strengths. A slow smile spread across Elena's face. That's actually perfect. But we'd need to start practicing soon. It's an ambitious piece. My place has 2 grand pianos, Victor offered. We could practice there on weekends. Look at you, Elena teased, offering to share your pianos. The Victor I met 3 months ago would never have suggested that. Victor laughed, acknowledging the truth in her words. The Victor you met 3 months ago needed that piano duel more than he realized. Their conversation was interrupted by David, who needed help moving equipment for the afternoon group class. As Victor helped rearrange chairs and music stands, he reflected on how natural it felt now to be part of this community, to contribute in practical ways that had nothing to do with prestige or recognition. The following Saturday, Elena arrived at Victor's apartment for their first practice session. She paused in the doorway, taking in the spacious living room with its 2 Steinway grands positioned side by side, near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. This is quite a place, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the minimalist space. Too much space for one person, Victor admitted as he took her coat. I bought it for the acoustics and the view, but lately I've been thinking it might be time for a change. They settled at the pianos, adjusting the benches and sorting through the sheet music Victor had prepared. The familiar routine of preparation felt different somehow, charged with a new energy as they began to play together. The Rachmaninoff suite demanded complete concentration and perfect communication between the pianists. As they worked through the first movement, stopping and starting to address challenging passages, Victor found himself more engaged than he had been in years. The music itself was complex and beautiful, but it was the collaborative nature of the piece that truly captivated him, the give and take, the necessity of listening as much as playing. After 2 hours of intense practice, they took a break. Victor prepared coffee while Elena walked around the apartment, looking at the few personal items displayed, awards, photographs from performances, framed reviews. You've had an impressive career, she observed when he returned with the coffee. Victor handed her a cup. On paper, yes. All the right schools, the right competitions, the right positions. He paused, looking out at the park below. But lately I've been wondering what it all amounts to. That sounds like a midlife crisis, Elena teased gently. Victor smiled. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's finally gaining some perspective. He turned to face her. I spent 20 years trying to be the best, collecting accolades, building my reputation. And yet in 3 months of teaching at East River, I've felt more fulfilled than in all those years combined. Elena's expression softened. Teaching has that effect. Watching someone discover music, seeing that moment when they connect with it, there's nothing quite like it. It's not just the teaching, Victor admitted. It's the purpose behind it. What you've built at East River matters in a way my career never did. They returned to the pianos after their coffee, working through the second movement with growing synchronicity. By the time Elena left that evening, they had made substantial progress on the piece and Victor had made a decision. The night of the summer showcase arrived with the community center auditorium filled to capacity. The program featured 20 students from East River and 10 from Westfield, performing pieces that ranged from simple Bach minuets to challenging concerto movements. Backstage, Victor helped calm nervous young performers and reminded them of the practice techniques they'd worked on. Lily, who would be performing Debussy's Clair de Lune, seemed unusually quiet. Everything okay? Victor asked, kneeling beside her chair. What if I make a mistake? She whispered. All those people. Then you'll be in good company, Victor said gently. Every great pianist makes mistakes. The music isn't about perfection, it's about communication. Remember what we talked about? You're telling a story with this piece. Lily nodded slowly. A story about moonlight on water. Exactly. And you tell it beautifully. Just play for the music, not the audience. When it was Lily's turn to perform, Victor watched from the wings, holding his breath as she walked to the piano. She sat, took a deep breath, and began to play. The delicate, dreamy notes of Claire de Lune floated over the hushed audience. Her performance wasn't technically perfect, but it held something more valuable, genuine feeling and a personal connection to the music. As the audience burst into applause at the end of Lily's performance, Victor felt a surge of pride more powerful than anything he'd experienced in his own career. The showcase continued, each student bringing their unique interpretation to the music they'd worked so hard to master. Finally, it was time for the finale. The duet Victor and Elena had been practicing for weeks. They walked onto the stage together, acknowledged the audience with a brief bow, and took their places at the two grand pianos that had been positioned to face each other. As they began to play the Rachmaninoff suite, Victor felt a sense of homecoming. This, the pure joy of creating music together, of using his talent not to elevate himself above others, but to create something beautiful with another person. This was what he had been missing all those years. When the final notes faded, the audience rose to their feet in appreciation. Victor and Elena stood, clasping hands as they took their bow, their journey from adversaries to partners complete. After the showcase, as they celebrated with students and parents, Elena pulled Victor aside. "I have news," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The foundation called yesterday. They want to fund the expansion, 3 new locations across the city." Victor's face broke into a wide smile. "That's incredible. When do we start?" "We?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have master classes to teach at Westfield?" "I've been meaning to talk to you about that," Victor said, suddenly serious. "I've decided to scale back my conservatory commitments. I've asked Jack to find someone else to take over most of my classes." Elena's expression showed her surprise. "But those positions are so prestigious. Aren't you worried about your career?" Victor shook his head, feeling more certain than he had about anything in years. "I'm not giving up teaching entirely, but I want to focus my energy where it makes a real difference." He met her gaze directly. "I want to be part of what you're building, Elena. If you'll have me." The smile that spread across Elena's face was all the answer he needed.